Both ISIS and Iran hold extensive views of end-time prophecies as taught by the Islamic Koran and the Hadith. Both of these segments of Islam believe the appearance of the Islamic Messiah, the Mahdi, will be ushered in by a great war involving the United States and Islam. Ryan Mauro, National Security Analyst for the Clarion Project, will explain more on today's edition of Politics and Religion.
Look, there are two things I don't discuss: politics and religion.
In my house, we don't talk about politics and we don't talk about religion.
I'll talk to you about anything except politics and religion.
I never talk about politics and religion.
Politics determines how we'll live here on Earth. Religion determines how we'll live forever. I'm Irvin Baxter. I think it's time we talk about it. It's our pleasure today to have a very special guest, Professor Ryan Mauro. He is the National Security Analyst for the Clarion Project and specializes in Middle Eastern affairs and especially in the Islamic actions that are now taking place throughout the Middle East. So, Professor Mauro, very glad to have you on the program today.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, now, just so we get right to it, because let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, you don't want to go away on this one. You're going to be intrigued with some of the information that Professor Mauro is going to bring to us today. First of all, there's so much ignorance in America today about what the real issues in the Middle East are. We've been through this time of the Arab Spring, so-called. Some people have now begun to call it the Arab Winter, but nevertheless, we've been through this time, and yet everybody's wondering, who's on first, who's on second, who's for us, who's against us. It seems like today's enemy is tomorrow's friend, and that's been going on now for a while, and it becomes very confusing after a while. So we're talking about ISIS, we're talking about Iran, both Islamic and yet fighting each other right now. So the first thing let's do, Ryan, let's just try to make some sense of this. Could you just brief us for a moment and let us know what the real issues are and who the real players are?
Well, basically the dividing line for me are the Islamists, which are Muslims that take their faith and they treat it as a political doctrine, and they want to combine mosque and state on the one side. And then on the other side are the non-Islamists, which would be us, various Muslim allies, the Christian minorities that are being persecuted in the region, Israel, and many, many others. So for me, if you want to boil it down and make it simplistic, there is the Islamist side, and then there's the non-Islamist side.
But right now, wouldn't you say that both the Islamic State and Iran would be among the Islamists, and yet they're fighting each other? How's that?
Right, because there's a power struggle among the Islamists, because in Islam you have the one group that is the Sunnis, and they make up somewhere around 85% of the overall Muslim population around the world are the Sunnis, and then the others are the Shiites, and it has to do with the leadership struggle. Iran is Shiite, the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda and Saudi Arabia are Sunni, and so they go at it a lot, but they also cooperate sometimes, and so it's not uncommon for them to fight each other in one area while at the same time assisting each other and allying in another.
Okay, so I guess a question that has occurred to my mind a lot is, why is the Islamic State advancing so quickly? President Obama acted like it was just some kind of a ragtag team, and yet we've been bombing them now for close to a year, and it seems like they're still advancing. So why is the Islamic State advancing so rapidly?
That largely has to do with foreign recruits. They declared what's called a caliphate, which is throughout the history of Islam, they would have empires called caliphates, and then they were dissolved, and Islamists believe that their number one duty right now is to resurrect the caliphate, and they believe that that would be a sign of prophecy as well. And so when the Islamic State accomplished this and then survived the U.S. bombing, took over so much territory, about half of Syria, one-third of Iraq, and were so successful, a lot of Islamists then became attracted to that, and so they have a large flow of foreign fighters around the world going to live in their newly declared caliphate, and the perception that they are winning and gaining territory despite how they're fighting virtually everybody, that reinforces the notion among radical Muslims that these are Allah's warriors, that Allah is granting them victory. And so the perception of victory enables them to recruit on a very large scale.
Well, I find it interesting that the Bible prophesies a war in the area of the Euphrates River. That's found in Revelation 9, verse 13 through 21. And according to your articles that I've been reading, both the Islamic State and the people from Iran, they both believe there's a war that's going to emanate from that part of the world that's going to end up being the final war, what we might call the Battle of Armageddon. Tell us a little bit about what they truly believe.
Right, this is really interesting. One of the commonalities between the Islamic State and Iran is how they guide their actions according to end times Islamic prophecy, and that's largely how they judge their success. It's not purely just about power and taking over the region for wealth and domination. It's actually, to them, the fulfillment of prophecy. So on the one hand, you have Iran, whose supreme leader, those around him often refer to him as Khorasani. His name is Khamenei, but people sometimes call him Khorasani. The reason is because Khorasani is the name in his Shiite Islamic end times prophecy of the person that's going to ally with their Islamic Messiah, destroy Israel, take over the region, and then usher in world peace by essentially conquering the world. So they believe that all the bloodshed, all the conflict in the region is actually a good thing, that it's something that they should help provoke, and that they are destined to be the ones that provoke the arrival of the Messiah that conquers the infidels like us once and for all. The Islamic State believes basically the same thing, even though in their prophecies they believe that they defeat the Iranians, and the Iranians believe that they defeat the Islamic State. And what is the Islamic State, an example of their prophecy, would be the fact that their English language magazine is called Dabiq. Now, what's Dabiq? Dabiq is a town in Syria where, according to the prophecies cited by the Islamic State, that there's going to be a very, very bloody battle between the true jihadists and the enemies of Islam. And they're going to be victorious, and then that will lead to a string of victories that ultimately results in their Messiah arriving and then conquering the world. And all of this relates to, of course, capturing Jerusalem and destroying Israel. So it's not just about destroying Israel because they view it as a foreign entity, as an extension of the West, as oppressing Palestinians. They believe that prophecy commands them to do that.
Okay, now let's pause just a moment because there may be a question out there. Where do they get their prophecies from? Which book is it? Is this the Koran? Is this the Hadith? Where are these prophecies coming from?
Largely the Hadith and then various interpretations by Islamic scholars. What these extremists often do is they say the scholars from long ago are basically above questioning because they lived closer to the time of Muhammad, so they know Allah better than anyone else, and so you can't really question them. And so it's a combination of citing the Hadith, which then cites the Quran, but it's largely the Hadith, and then scholars who interpret that and say, this is what all of that means.
So they've actually put out a film, I understand, that actually puts Khamenei in as this special person that's supposed to usher in the coming of the Mahdi, which is the Muslim Messiah. Now, what happens if Khamenei dies and this hasn't happened? Is this whole thing going to throw them into confusion? Is it going to fall apart? Are they simply going to rename someone else to play that role? How's that going to happen?
It's going to be very damaging for their ideology. There's going to be a lot of disappointed Islamists who will still be radical and they'll still hate us, but they'll be disillusioned because they were so hopeful that Khamenei would be the guy in prophecy that makes all this happen. What would likely happen following that is that his replacement would either try to say, look, I'm actually fulfilling the prophecies better than Khamenei, so we were wrong, it wasn't him, it was me. Or he'll say, look, I'm not the guy talked about in prophecy, but I am fulfilling prophecy through my actions, so I may not be the figurehead, but you can tell by what's happening on the ground that things are moving in that direction. And when you look at this prophecy video that was produced by the Iranian regime in 2011, and you look at the prophecies that they're talking about what's happening on the ground, if you can put yourself in their shoes and pretend that you actually believe in these prophecies, you don't really blame them for believing that it's all about to happen and that things are moving in their direction. I can understand why they would look at these prophecies and look at what's happening in the region and say, look, our time has come. Because it talks about things like a civil war happening in Iraq, about what would be interpreted to be U.S. forces coming in and causing a war there and Saddam being killed, a civil war in Syria, a successful revolution in Yemen, and most specifically, the death of the Saudi king, which happened this year. For years, the Iranian regime has been saying that when the Saudi king dies, that would be the green light indicating that we've entered the final phase of their prophecies and things are going to dramatically escalate.
So since they believe so strongly that they are people of destiny right now, that these prophecies actually tag them as people of destiny, not only do they believe that Khomeini is a central figure, but they believe Ahmadinejad, and they also believe that Nasrallah is also a central figure. Since they believe this, then that gives them reason to take extraordinary risk, to push the envelope, because they believe there's this war coming, and it doesn't matter how bloody it gets or how much it appears that they're losing. Apparently they believe that the Mahdi is going to come, intervene, and that he will turn defeat into victory. So consequently, this gives them almost a death wish in a way. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, and they believe that the way to get instant salvation for your sin is by dying in jihad anyway. So you could remove all of these prophecies, but if your prescription for salvation, the only guaranteed way to get into heaven is by dying in jihad, then you're going to be naturally attracted to that. Because one of the big issues within Islamic theology, more generally, is the issue of salvation. How do you deal with your own sin when you fall short of what Allah commands you? And the general idea is, well, your good deeds have to outweigh your bad deeds. But how do you quantify that? There's no possible way. So it creates a lot of insecurity. And what we see in the wiretap transcripts of people from the Islamic State and other terrorists is they'll actually say, as they're planning their terrorist attacks, look, I've got a lot of sin I have to make up for, so I need to do the most extreme thing, which is dying in jihad, in order to guarantee my entry into heaven because I've messed up so many times. So their ideology has multiple different layers that need to be countered, but the prophecy is especially disturbing because of how it gets rid of deterrence. Because if you believe that the Islamic Messiah is going to appear during this very bloody war and come rescue you against your superior enemy, then that becomes difficult to deter, because it doesn't matter how many tanks and airplanes and soldiers you have to outnumber them. They believe that the Messiah is going to come and give them victory, and it doesn't matter what you do.
Our guest today is Professor Ryan Mauro. He's the National Security Analyst for the Clarion Project. If you'd like to go to their website, it's clarionproject.org. That's CLARION project.org. We're going to be asking some more very critical questions. I want to know if President Obama is aware of these prophecies, if the Obama administration is aware of these prophecies. Those are some of the questions we'll be asking Professor Mauro as soon as we get back. So stay with us.
Watch the prophecies come alive on End of the Age every Monday night at 7:30 p.m. Central Time on TBN. If you're wondering questions like, why is anti-Semitism rising in our world again? What are the 7 trumpets? And what about the Antichrist? Where will he come from? What will happen at the second coming of Christ? And what is even my place in the end time? All these questions are answered on our End of the Age television program. You can watch it on TBN, the Church Channel, Daystar, and more. Call us at 1-800-END-TIME to find what station End of the Age is on in your area. That's 1-800-363-8463. Or go to endtime.com and click the broadcast link.
If ever people need to hear the unvarnished truth, it is now. There are some subjects that are not politically correct to talk about, but they're urgent. That's why I'm grateful for Endtime magazine. If you're not a subscriber, you're missing information that will really impact your life. Endtime has a bi-monthly magazine that explains how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. You can get a 2-year subscription for only $29. You can also get a bulk subscription and pass them out to your church. We have gotten reports that Endtime magazine has caused spiritual awakenings in churches when they see the prophecies being fulfilled right now. You can start your own ministry and leave them in doctors' offices, libraries, laundromats. You never know if you might be responsible for saving someone who is searching for the unvarnished truth. That's what the magazine did in my life. Call 1-800-363-8463. That's 1-800-ENDTIME and get your subscription today.
In case you're just joining us, our guest today is Professor Ryan Mauro of the Clarion Project, and we're talking about the root causes of the conflict in the Middle East, the Islamic State, Iran, and all of the other players in the Middle East. It's quite a complex situation when you look at it. But Ryan, I'd like to know this. Do you have any reason to believe that the Obama administration is aware of what you're telling us today? And if so, does it influence anything they do in any way at all?
I don't believe so, because I haven't seen any Obama administration official even mention this topic. Even unnamed ones that talk to the press off the record, I've never heard them mention this. In my own talks with counterterrorism personnel and different government officials, I've never heard it really mentioned, except sometimes with the Islamic State, but definitely not with Iran. So I don't believe so. And also, it's really not compatible with his worldview as he presents it, which is that all of this rhetoric, death to America, death to Israel, is essentially political rhetoric that just reflects their anger at the West and isn't something they actually want to do. He seems to compare Iran to the Soviet Union and sees the rhetoric as just something that's done for political purpose as opposed to being genuinely ideologically felt. And there's a lot of people that think that. There's a lot of experts that think that, even though I disagree with them. I think that the Iranian regime especially talks about this so much, they don't gain anything from it, and they describe it with such detail and such a comprehensive manner that they have to believe in it.
Well, they really do believe in it from all I've been able to read. Now, let me ask you this. This is important to me. President Obama, with his Islamic background, his father was a Muslim. He attended Muslim school for a while. We've noticed that he gathers quite a number of the Muslim Brotherhood around him in his administration. So wherever he is, do you think that his Muslim roots and his Muslim associations influence in any way his policy as it is carried out in the Middle East?
I'm really not qualified to give a psychological profile. I haven't seen any evidence indicate that he himself is a Muslim, which I get asked a lot. If he says he's a Christian, I'm willing to accept that because there's plenty of non-Muslims that believe in the same worldview. There's plenty of atheists that believe in it, which is that despite all the rhetoric, we're dealing with mostly rational actors who care about their own power and wealth, and therefore you can deal with them on that basis. And it's just a matter of not making them hate us so much. I remember there was an interview where when Obama was campaigning to be president back in like 2007, 2008, he made a comment where he said that what we need to tell Hamas and Hezbollah is that their violence is counterproductive to their, quote, legitimate claims. There was no follow-up question saying, well, what are those legitimate claims of Hamas and Hezbollah? Because what it indicates is that he believes that all of this terrorism and extremism comes out from an understandable anger towards the U.S., towards Israel, and towards the West as a whole, and then some people go a step too far, like Al-Qaeda. And again, that's not a radical point of view. That's a mainstream, very popular point of view, even though I don't believe that it's accurate.
Okay, so we're negotiating with Iran right now, the big 5+1. We're negotiating to try to conclude a deal with an entity who embrace these prophecies that their destiny is to destroy the nation of Israel. And the people in Israel know this. They are very opposed to the agreement that's being worked out right now, according to all that we know about that agreement, even though a lot of it is still secret. So how do we seriously try to reach an agreement with people who really do hold this view that they're destined to soon rule the world, go to war against the United States, go to war against the West, rule the world, and destroy Israel? How in the world do we come to an agreement with people like that?
Well, because there's that school of thought that says that all of that rhetoric is essentially meaningless and that Iran might wish that Israel doesn't exist, but deep inside they know that Israel isn't going anywhere. And so by offering to essentially give them economic aid by lifting sanctions, we can bribe them into acting more rationally, joining the international community. And President Obama gave an interview that was little noticed, where he explained his point of view, which is that the Iranian population is very young, pro-Western, which is true. But his idea is that by bringing Iran into the international community and constraining their nuclear program, that you enter in globalization, and then Iran will become more rational, more westernized, and there's a certain logic to that. There's some legitimate thought behind it, but my argument is that that's not going to happen with the current regime in power. Yes, it's true that the population is young and largely pro-American. Some say that the Iranian population is the most pro-American population in the region besides the Kurds in Israel, and that's a tremendous advantage. But we're not going to see the fruits of that until the regime is overthrown by the people. And so to gamble that we can strike a deal with the current theocratic regime that believes in all this stuff, that's the largest state sponsor of terrorism around the world, according to the State Department, is a bit of a fantasy. The argument for the deal as it stands now, we don't know the final details, is that it will expand inspections within Iran never before, although it's far short of what it should be, that it will constrain the Iranian nuclear program and limit what they're producing, which is theoretically true, because before they were just producing as much as they liked, however they liked. And so they hold on to those couple of positives, and then they dismiss the negatives, which are far worse, and that's why the deal is so bad. It's not that it's absent of good features, it's that the bad features far outweigh the good ones. And the biggest bad feature, or the two biggest, is that, number one, the Iranians are not being forced to give up a single piece of nuclear equipment. Not a single nuclear site will be dismantled. And then secondly, is that you're going to enrich the Iranian regime with all of this international business that's going to happen when sanctions are eased, and then you're never going to be able to hit them with sanctions again because you're going to have too many countries making billions and billions of blood dollars off of dealing with them.
So isn't this about the same thinking that caused World War II? When Neville Chamberlain made the deal with Adolf Hitler, everybody, even though Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf what he was going to do, and even though he was openly making speeches as to what he was going to do, yet Chamberlain said, no, we've made peace in our time, and he doesn't really mean this. This is just political rhetoric. It sounds like the exact same thing to me.
I believe it's very similar. Very, very similar. And in our film about this, we have a series of films that are available online that I recommend that people check out because they are based off of lots of studying that we did of how different messages reach different personalities. And so you can go to clarionproject.org, look at our films that have been coming out one per week for the past several weeks that are each very different in style and messaging, so you can say, okay, what video will best reach my cousin? What will best reach my pastor? What will best reach this person? And so it really enables people to reach others in a way that hasn't been done before because you have a menu that you can choose from. And our one film talks about the history of dealing with dictators, including those that are currently in the Middle East right now. Because what we found in our research is that the Holocaust comparison, the Hitler comparison, doesn't really work as well anymore because even though it really wasn't that long ago historically, many, many Americans feel it was. And so what they say is, well, that was a weird, odd time in history. The odds of that happening again are very small. Lightning doesn't strike the same place twice, and so that comparison seems like fear-mongering. And so we made this film as a response to say, well, we're not just comparing this to Hitler. Let's look at recent history and see how many times deals like this have actually worked. And the answer is very, very few times has it actually worked. I can't even think of an example right now where it's worked.
So, ladies and gentlemen, theclarionproject.org, these films that are there, I've not been privileged to view those myself yet, but I'm going to, because we really need to understand what's going on. It's like we're fighting fog right now. It's like people really don't know much about this, but I promise you, we all are going to wish that we knew a whole lot more about it before it's over with. Now, another thing, Ryan, that I found of incredible interest is this special role that the city of Dabiq in Syria occupies in all this prophecy, and the reason that the Islamic State actually called the name of their American paper, I think they call it by the Dabiq. Explain a little bit about what that's all about.
Right. It's alternately referred to as Dabiq or Dabiq, and that's the title of their English language magazine. So it shows you just how much emphasis they put on this place in Syria. And when they were beheading one American, they made a point of bringing him to this area called Dabiq and videotaping and saying on the video over and over again, we are at Dabiq, and we are holding an American here, and this is where we're going to kill him. And the point of that was lost on most people because they didn't know the prophetic significance of that. The prophecies that the Islamic State cites say that the true jihadists, which they believe to be them in that area, are going to capture Romans, which they equate with the United States. And they would hold them hostage in that area of Dabiq. And then the Romans, meaning us, would show up and fight them there. And it would be very bloody. 1/3 of the jihadists would be killed, 1/3 would flee, but the final 1/3 would survive. And so by pointing out that they had an American at Dabiq, they were drawing a parallel to that prophecy, saying that the final war would begin when the jihadists hold Romans at Dabiq. And so a lot of their legitimacy rests upon them holding that area. They had to go in and capture it and kick out some other Syrian rebels that were holding it. And so one of my arguments has been, well, if the prophecy says that the Romans, meaning us, are going to send in troops and there's going to be a big battle there, don't send in troops. You don't want to vindicate their prophecy and help them get recruits. But make sure they lose it. Bomb it. Others in the area that hate ISIS, arm them. If they lose Dabiq, then how can they claim to be the true jihadis that are fulfilling prophecy? They can't. So we can flip their prophecies on them.
So Peter Kossig, he's the American that they beheaded there, and according to their prophecies, they're going to kill Americans there, and then America and the West, which they call Rome, including Europe and the United States of America. That's going to provoke them to come against Islam. Then Islam is going to defeat them, and during this time, I believe it states that the Mahdi will come and will fight on the side of Islam, and that ultimately Islam is going to be victorious. We're going to tell you more. We're up against another break. However, you're listening to Politics and Religion. I'll be this weekend in McKinney, Texas on Friday night, in Garland, Texas on Saturday evening. I'll tell you more about that later on in the program, and we'll be back in just a moment.
If you've been through our Understanding the End Time 14 DVD series and want to continue to grow your knowledge of Bible prophecy, you will want our Increase Your Understanding package. This 10 DVD set includes lessons such as when will the rapture happen? Will Islam rule the world? Signposts of the Second Coming. Israel's future according to Bible prophecy. Master plan of the dragon. Seeds of Armageddon. And more. Daniel 11:33 says, "And they that understand among the people shall instruct many." We've put together this set at a special price for those who are preparing themselves now to be ready to instruct many in the days ahead. Go to endtime.com or call 1-800-ENDTIME and ask for the Increase Your Understanding 10 DVD set.
My name is Vince, and my job is to oversee the Endtime web presence. I thought I'd take a little time during this commercial break and give you a mini tour of what Endtime.com has to offer. On our homepage, click the Watch button, and you can stream Irvin's broadcast live at 3 p.m. Central Time. You can also click Archives to access thousands of past episodes. We also have many other free videos to watch on our site, such as Another Jewish Holocaust Ahead and The Great Tribulation. Go to the Endtime store for video and audio downloads, books, DVDs, and more. Be sure to check out our blog, which features posts from Irvin Baxter, important Endtime updates, and prophecy articles. We also have a section for urgent questions, archive magazine articles, and, well, my time is about up. You're just going to have to finish the rest of the tour by checking out endtime.com on your computer, mobile phone, or tablet. Go to endtime.com and discover a world of prophecy today. That's endtime.com.
The Prophecy Conference in McKinney, Texas will be this Friday, June the 26th, 7:30 p.m. My subject will be Another Jewish Holocaust Ahead. The Jewish people after Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany said, never again. And all of us hoped that it would never happen again. However, the prophecies of the Bible clearly state that it is going to happen again. Now, the good news is there is a way to escape, to avoid it. If you know it's coming, you'll know what to do to escape. Nevertheless, I'll be talking about all those issues this coming Friday, June the 26th, 7:30 p.m. at McKinney, Texas. The address will be 2705 West Virginia Parkway in McKinney. And then on Saturday evening, I will be in Garland, Texas. I'll be speaking on America's God-given destiny. Now, many people say that America is not in the prophecies of the Bible. We're going to give you absolute proof that America is in the Bible. This is Saturday, June the 27th at 6 p.m., and we will be there. We'll talk about what America's destiny really is. What will America's relationship be with Israel? And other questions that all of us are interested in. So Friday night, 7:30 p.m., Saturday night, 6 p.m., I would suggest that you attend both of those sessions. They will be dramatically different, but nevertheless, things that I think that all of you would really like to hear. America's God-given destiny being presented for the very first time this coming Saturday night, so don't miss that. Our guest today is Ryan Mauro. He is from the Clarion Project, and he's giving us insight into what's really going on. Now, I want to go back for just a moment to why people become complacent so quickly when they think, well, it happened under Adolf Hitler, it couldn't happen again. And yet in the 20th century, we saw Stalin, and there's a debate about how many he killed, somewhere between 20 million and 60 million. And then we saw Adolf Hitler, 52 million died in World War II. And then in addition to that, we saw the Cultural Revolution in China, and people estimate around 60 million died there. Now, this all happened in the last century. I mean, we're only 15 years removed from that time. And yet we see this incredible slaughter of human beings. And so we have to ask, hopefully it could never happen again. But the Bible does prophesy it's going to happen again. And we're watching all of this escalation. So those are just some questions that are occupying all of our minds right now that I think we absolutely have to think about. So, Ryan, tell us, from your judgment, from your experience, what do you expect to happen?
Well, I think that it's most likely that there's going to be a deal with Iran, because if I'm an Iranian cleric and I'm strategizing saying, how can I best expand my power? How can I cure my weaknesses? How can I get a nuclear weapon? This deal would be the best way to go about it, because you can either race towards developing a nuclear weapon and then hopefully the world accepts it once you do get that and then lift sanctions, or you can do it the smarter way. That takes longer, but it's more efficient, which is what the Iranians are doing right now. Strike a deal, get the sanctions lifted that are very, very painful for the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime always has to worry about being overthrown, so they need that economic pressure lifted. Get all sorts of money with which you can enrich your cronies, try to appease your population, expand your support for terrorism, which includes those that are going to try to kill our soldiers in Iraq and those that are actively killing our soldiers in Afghanistan right now, and also develop a nuclear weapon later and not have to worry about future sanctions. So from a strategic perspective, if I'm sitting in the Iranian headquarters in Tehran and they say, come up with the best strategy to get a nuclear weapon, not necessarily the quickest, it would look very similar to this.
Well, and I agree with you. I think you're absolutely right about that, that there's probably going to be an agreement, and the agreement is going to pave the way for Iran to actually achieve a nuclear weapon, even though they're going to say it'll be 10 years before they'll have the ability, unless they secretly do something and they have these, the latest centrifuges that they have developed. They can produce enriched uranium very quickly. Some people think that it could be weeks if Iran makes a decision, breakout time until they would actually have a nuclear weapon. Of course, that's a tremendous concern to Israel, since Ahmadinejad, every time he came within 10 foot of a microphone, liked to say Israel's going to be wiped off the map, and especially since they're moving toward a nuclear bomb, and Israel's a one-bomb state. One nuclear bomb in Tel Aviv is probably going to make the entire nation uninhabitable. So we really live in some very weighty and critical times that it would really be foolish to wipe off the rhetoric of, to ignore the rhetoric of these regimes. And it looks like that Benjamin Netanyahu is he's almost standing alone. It's like he's got his finger in the dike trying to hold everything back, and everybody else is in la-la land sort of walking along. That's the way it looks to me. What do you think?
Well, on this issue, he's actually in line with the Arabs. It's an open secret that the Israelis have been secretly communicating with the Saudis and the Egyptians, virtually every Arab country that doesn't like Iran, and they're all on the same page here. France is tougher on the issue than we are, and the Iranians, the real sticking point that is really the only reason a deal hasn't been struck yet, has to deal with the inspections, because what Iran is saying is, we don't want you to have the ability to inspect any military site. So how that works is that if UN inspectors want to investigate a nuclear site and the Iranians want to hide something, all they have to do is say, oh, that's a military site, you can't go in. And there were some Iranian officials saying, well, maybe we will allow guided inspections. That's not an inspection, that's a tour, so that's not going to fly. And then the one nuclear site that we still have never gotten access to, and is one of the most critical ones, is at a place called Parchin. And that's where Iran worked on nuclear warheads. The reason that the Iranians want to cover that up is because whereas everything else you can, with a stretch, argue it's for a domestic energy program, if you're working on nuclear warheads and explosives, you can't say that that's an energy program. So the Iranians are working very hard to cleanse that site right now. We've seen through satellites that they're cleansing it and removing dirt and things like that, and they don't want to give access to it. So that's part of the reason they're saying no access to a military site, because the most incriminating site for them is, in fact, a military site. They're also not allowing inspectors to interview some of their most important nuclear scientists that have worked on nuclear warheads in the past. So it's going to be interesting to see how the U.S. and Iran bridge that gap.
Let's get back to the Islamic State for a moment, because they've really captured the attention of the world. When they, first of all, they took Mosul, which is modern Nineveh, I understand, the second largest city in Iraq, and then they've taken half to three-quarters of Syria. They control 40% of the Euphrates River. They took Ramadi not too long ago, Palmyra. So they've taken a lot of territory. And just when President Obama seems to intimate, oh, we're slowing them down, we're going to get to them, we're going to disable them, yet it seems like they continue to advance. Now, they've claimed that they're a caliphate, which means we represent all of Islam, and of course there are 1.5, 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, and so that has a certain appeal, like you said earlier, that the Caliphate was destroyed as of World War I. It was disbanded when the Ottoman Empire was defeated. And so consequently, now they're dreaming of restoring this Caliphate. Okay, so here the Islamic State is. They're claiming to be the voice of Islam in the world. And that has a lot of appeal to a lot of people, a lot of Muslims. Now, what would happen with all of this turmoil in Saudi Arabia if Islam launched a war against Saudi Arabia, and because they want to control Mecca and Medina, the two holiest places, to the Islamic religion? If they, in fact, launched an invasion of Saudi Arabia, what would the consequences be?
To some degree, that's already happening. What's interesting is that there's an ongoing proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia that the Islamic State is involved in throughout the region, where you have the Islamic State taking over parts of Syria. You have the Saudis backing the rebels, the Iranians backing the Syrian dictator. In Yemen, you have the Saudis and other Arab countries backing the Yemeni forces against the Iranian-backed Shiite rebels there. And the Iranian-backed rebels overthrew the Yemeni government, which also was a sign of prophecy being fulfilled and is a big threat to the Saudis. There's a lot of proxy war going back and forth. I don't think that the Iranians would stage a conventional invasion of Saudi Arabia, because that's just not how those countries fight wars nowadays, and it's counterproductive. But what's really frightening for the U.S. and for Saudi Arabia is that 90% of Saudi Arabia's oil is located in this coastal area called the Eastern Province. The reason that's such a big deal is because that's where the Shiites within Iran reside. So if you're Iran and you build terrorist proxies among Shiites, and the Saudi Shiites reside right where all the oil is, I mean, that's a very juicy terrorist target for when the time is right. And the Iranians it looks to be that they just keep restraining themselves right now for strategic reasons, but the Islamic State is trying to blow up that same area by attacking the Shiites to try to trigger this grand escalation in Sunni Shiite war. So to sum up the dynamic there, what you have is the Saudi royal family trying to stay in power and fighting a proxy war with Iran, and then you have Iran and the Islamic State, even though they kill each other, both trying to ignite the area where the oil is within Saudi Arabia.
So if either Iran or the Islamic State took control of that area, would the U.S. go in?
I think we would have to. I mean, the Saudis would have their Arab allies doing it, but we would be behind the scenes, probably providing air support, because the economic catastrophe for the United States would be, impossible to calculate at that point. And the Iranians have tried this before. In 2011 or 2012, they actually tried carrying out a 9/11 cyber attack, like something on that scale, where they attacked an oil company within Saudi Arabia with the objective of shutting down the oil production. And they came pretty darn close to doing it, and something like 30,000 computers got damaged in the process. So this is something the Iranians have tried in the past, and they've just failed to, and now tension is higher now than it was back then when they were trying to do that. So you have all the ingredients there for a major escalation, a major oil crisis to happen. And on top of that, the Iranians also need the price of oil to go up because their budget is in bad shape, even with sanctions being loosened. And so they need the price of oil to go up because that's how they make their money. It's through oil exports. So for a matter of financial survival, they need a conflict.
So the Saudis, if they fall to these radical elements, America probably cannot stay back because the Saudis are the number one controller of oil in the world, at least they have been historically. Wow, we're sitting on a powder keg right now. We got one more segment with our guest today, Ryan Mauro, so don't go away. We're going to ask some very critical questions.
Hey, Micah, what you doing?
Oh, I'm just jumping on this great deal. Endtime has 4 DVDs about the coming one world religion that are normally $80, but I'm getting them for $65.
Wow, where did you hear about that deal?
Don't you get Endtime's e-newsletter?
No, what's that?
Well, when Endtime has a special sale going on, those who subscribe to the e-newsletter and promotions are the first to know. Plus, every Friday they send out a Prophecy in the News update letting you know the important stories that happened that week concerning Bible prophecy.
That does sound like a pretty good deal, but I'm sure they send out tons of emails, and I can cannot afford to get any more emails.
No, Endtime is pretty good about that. They only send about 3 a week. Besides, can you afford to miss out on this great deal and pay full price? I see those are new shoes.
Oh, yeah. Okay, how do you sign up for this?
You just go to endtime.com and on the bottom of the homepage, click the subscribe button.
Perfect. I'm doing it now. Oh, and maybe I should unsubscribe from some of these shoe stores.
Yeah, that might help you out.
I grew up in church, and like most kids, I learned the 10 Commandments. But the 4th commandment bothered me through the years. What does it mean to keep the Sabbath? Am I supposed to keep it like they did in the Old Testament? That's why I was glad to hear Irvin come out with the new DVD, To Sabbath or Not to Sabbath. Like most end-time videos, I was enlightened to see what had been in the Bible all along, but didn't know it was there. He laid out the scriptures in an easy-to-follow lesson, and now I don't have to worry anymore. I know how to keep the Sabbath. Get your copy today.
The website of the Clarion Project is simply clarionproject.org. There are quite a number of films there that will educate you on the intricacies of what's going on in the Middle East, something that all of us cannot afford to not know. You know, it's so interesting, Ryan, that the Islamic prophecies prophesy a war for the Euphrates River area, and the Bible prophesies a war for the Euphrates River area. It specifically says in the Bible that there's a war coming that will end up killing 1/3 of the human race from the area of the Euphrates, and that's exactly what it appears that the Quran or the Hadith says. In addition to that, the Muslim prophecies say that Jesus is going to come back. They believe in the second coming of Jesus. They just don't believe Jesus was God, and they don't believe Jesus was the Messiah. But they believe Jesus is coming back, just like Christians believe that Jesus is coming back. And most Christians believe we're living in that era right now. So when you have these two prophetic views, in some ways harmonizing with each other, only the Muslims believe when Jesus comes back, he is going to break the cross, and he's going to tell all the Christians of the world that you need to follow Islam, because Islam is the proper religion of the world. This is when you see these two worldviews, and it looks like they're colliding right now. Well, it's an amazing thing.
It's interesting to see how the Sunni and the Shiite end times prophecies collide with each other, but then you also see the prophecies colliding with Christianity and Judaism as well. And it's common to hear Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State refer to breaking the cross. And usually the news media says, okay, they're talking about attacking Christians. That's not new. But what they're actually doing is citing the prophecy that you mentioned, which is that Jesus is going to appear along with the Mahdi, their messianic figure, and Jesus is going to be like the number 2 in command. And Jesus will lead the Islamic world to victory, and he will break the cross for the whole world to see, and that will be his way of saying that Christianity was wrong, Islam was right, and then he will implement Sharia law, and the whole world will become Muslim. Whereas before it was living under Islamic domination, they believe Jesus is actually the one that will come and basically be a tyrant. And now not all Muslims necessarily have that interpretation, but all the Islamists, the radicals, they all agree on this point, that Jesus is going to appear, discredit Christianity, and bring them victory, and they believe that Jesus will also kill this great infidel leader called the Dajjal, who is like the equivalent of our Antichrist. So they have an Antichrist as well in their prophecy. It's interesting to see the mirroring that happens.
It really is. Now, there's one more question I've got to get to before we run out of time. If there is going to be the igniting of a war, say World War III, from this area, I personally believe the Bible says there's going to be. But I'm not asking you to commit to that. But if there is going to be a full igniting of war, you've studied this closely, what do you think the flashpoint might be caused by?
I would say it's most likely to start with an escalation of the proxy war between the Iranians and the Arabs, and that you're not going to be looking at necessarily a fight where it's Arab versus Israel or Muslim versus Israel. It's first going to start with a dramatic escalation of the fight amongst Arabs and amongst Muslims in the region, and then it's going to spread from there. And according to the Iranian prophecies, they don't just go and blow up Israel. What they believe happens is that they cause all sorts of chaos and bloodshed within Saudi Arabia. It becomes chaos, and this is after they take over Yemen, which, again, that just shows prophecy unfolding in front of their eyes as they see it. And then as that chaos in Saudi Arabia happens, they develop an Arab coalition. There's a civil war in Iraq and Syria, which they win, and then they take over Jerusalem, and then once Jerusalem is taken over, that's when the Mahdi appears and finally destroys Israel and the U.S. and brings about final victory. So there's a lot of bloodshed that they have to perpetrate before the final Messiah comes as they see it, and that includes conquering much of the Arab world and developing a coalition. So that's where their geopolitical strategy intersects with prophecy. It's not just about igniting a war. There's a certain way to do it and certain steps towards doing it that you can see the Iranians following.
So I think everybody in the world needs to understand that Islam, most of Islam believes they are to rule the world, that they are called to establish a worldwide caliphate. And we see Iran moving. They already control the Straits of Hormuz, and they're also moving now in Yemen to control the straits that lead into the Suez Canal area where 40% of the world's oil passes through. If Iran controls both of those choke points and they're able to enforce their control there, this is a huge control over the oil of the world. And Iran, right before our eyes, is moving to take control, because if you control Yemen, you control that area, and they're trying to do that through the Houthis. So what are we missing here? I mean, is this going to happen, or what's going to happen?
It looks like it's going to happen, because even though the Iranian regime on paper is very weak, and a lot of advocates of the nuclear deal say, look, Iran can be contained because there's not that many Shiites in the Muslim world. If you look where the Shiites are located and the strategic advantages that they have, you can't blame the Iranians for thinking that they can win the region. It's very possible to do. We now know from a leaked Saudi Arabian intelligence document that just came out yesterday that Iran has moved nuclear equipment to Sudan since 2012. We know that they've outsourced a lot of their program to North Korea, so we can't kid ourselves into thinking that just because the program may be frozen in Iran, best case scenario, it's still going to be going on in other areas of the world. So they're still going to be advancing. And we should also enter in real quickly the electromagnetic pulse threat, which is where you don't just set off a nuclear weapon on American soil. You can launch it off of a shipping vessel off of one of the coasts, detonate it in the atmosphere, and depending on how you do it, and it's an easy thing to do, you can potentially wipe out all electronic components over the continental U.S. And that's not really theory, because the government put together a commission to study this because it sounded so wacko. And it turned out that what the commission concluded in 2008 was that not only is this possible, it's achievable. The Iranians are simulating how to do it. Their military manuals talk about doing it. And if this happens, somewhere between 2/3 and 90% of Americans will die within 1 year. And like I said, I would have thought that was science fiction and craziness, and that's why I didn't talk about it much until this report came out where this congressional panel confirmed it.
Okay, now we've run out of time long before we ran out of questions, but I've got to ask you this one last question. ISIS has already reached the border of Jordan, both from the Syrian side and from the Iraq side. If ISIS dares to invade Jordan, what happens?
There'll be a lot of instability and bloodshed. Right now, it doesn't look like they could topple the Jordanian king. But one of the things we've seen is that the polls show that ISIS has very, very little support in the region. We're talking about single-digit numbers usually. But that hasn't stopped them from seizing territory. So it's very hard to tell what exactly happens.
Well, we know that there are, 70% of Jordan is Palestinian, and they do have, ISIS does have some very strong support there. But don't you believe that if they would in fact invade Jordan, that Israel, that's a red line for Israel, and Israel's going to say, look, everybody's playing patty cakes with these people. They don't know how to win a war. We have to go in right now. If Jordan was in threat to become another ISIS state, don't you believe Israel would be forced to go in against them?
I think that they would do things covertly, probably carry out some airstrikes like they do in Lebanon and Syria that they then deny or at least don't comment on. But I think what the Israelis would try to encourage would be an American response, because we could do it with much better success, and also try to get Egypt and the other Arabs to step in, because the Egyptian government's talking about forming their own NATO force of 40 to 50,000 troops so that they can start taking care of their own problems instead of always calling the United States.
So is Bashar Assad going to survive, or is he going to be taken down?
Right now, it looks like he's going to survive, at least for the medium term, but I would not be surprised at all if tomorrow someone just shot and killed him. But in terms of actually being overthrown by the rebels, right now he seems to be in a weakening but still stable position. But the overall dynamics indicate that eventually his regime would be overthrown. But right now, it looks pretty stable, but even though they are losing ground.
Our guest today, Professor Ryan Mauro. He is the National Security Analyst for the Clarion Project. The website is clarionproject.org. Professor Mauro, it's been terrific. Thank you very much for being with us today. We'll do it again sometime, hopefully. We appreciate you being on with us today.
Sure, thanks so much.
And thank you. Now, for all of you out there, Endtime Ministries does have a DVD. It's entitled, Will Islam Rule the World? Many people believe Islam is ultimately going to rule the world. And will the Antichrist be a Muslim? Big questions with biblical answers. So if you'd like to have your own copy of that, the title of the DVD, Will Islam Rule the World? Give us a call. The number to call, 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. And I would really recommend to you that you get our Understanding End Time series, 14 DVDs that will give you the biblical worldview of what is happening now and what is going to happen in the future. Really, we need to know, because if we don't know what the Bible says, we're really sort of driving through our rearview mirror. We're stumbling along blindly. There's a scripture in the Bible that says, the sons of Issachar were men who had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do. If we don't know what's coming, we don't know how to prepare. So if you have never been through all 14 lessons of the Understanding the End Time course, I recommend it to you. I believe every person on earth needs to know. About 30% of the Bible is prophecy, and about 90% of that 30% is designed for our time right now. I mean, there's volumes in the Bible about what is coming and what is happening right now. If you're interested, give us a call. The number to call is 1-800-END-TIME. Ask for the Understanding the End Time series. And don't forget an additional DVD, Will Islam Rule the World? 800-END-TIME is the number.
Politics and Religion is a production of End Time Ministries. It is a daily 1-hour broadcast dedicated to bringing you the prophetic fulfillments happening on a daily basis.
If you would like to listen to archive shows, subscribe to End Time Magazine, find a prophecy conference in your area, order End Time resources, watch our TV show, or subscribe to our free weekly e-news, call 1-800-END-TIME or go to endtime.com and take advantage of what our site has to offer.
Connect to End Time Ministries by partnering with us and help this message make a global impact.
End Time Ministries is partner supported. We would like to say thank you to all of our loyal partners, listeners, and friends for helping make Politics and Religion and End Time Ministries possible.